Monday morning. We're back in the library studio. I am your host, Craig Wynn. We're going to continue our series where we're trying to understand the picture that was painted in the last mashal. It is Proverbs 31, and it was remarkable in that it is about our King, the Messiah, the chosen one, the man who ultimately became our Savior by fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim in 33 CE, the very man that was counterfeited to create the myth of Jesus. He had a really low moment in his life, and so he needed an intervention. Yes, it is true that the Son of God and the Messiah was a really bad boy. He, in his pursuit of Bathsheba, not only took a married woman's to be his and impregnated her, but then he schemed to kill her husband so that he could keep her. And God did not like that one little bit and dressed him down, and they engendered a serious timeout for bad behavior. And it was during that period that our King, who, in the psalm that he revealed after God's dressing down, where God said, what you did was a total rejection of who I am and my testimony to you, my instructions to you. And as a result of this, really horrid things are going to happen to you and to Israel. I cannot overlook this. And so after everything did fall apart, he had his daughter raped by his son. Then one son killed another son, and then that son led a coup against him. It was horrid what happened. But he then had an intervention. And that intervention came by way of Yahweh's Amma. Yahweh's Amma is a character that is portrayed throughout the story. She makes a number of appearances, and she's spoken of quite frequently prophetically. She could even be the voice of many of the mashal word pictures, could in fact be she and her husband talking to their son, giving their son advice about Yahowah and his participation in the covenant family. And her interaction with Dowd is the subject of the final word picture, which is the basis of this series. And we've gone over it in previous programs. And it's rather astonishing. And it establishes this Amma, this surrogate mother, this Emma of Dowd, who is referred to as Ashar. And Ashar goes back to the days of Leah, when she gave birth to the tribe of Asher, the first born of Asher, and said that she would be remembered forevermore as Ashar. And then Dowd goes so far as to say that this is the most extraordinary of all women who have ever lived. There are a number of other mashal and mizmor, proverbs and psalms regarding this moment. And as we press on, it even appears that there is a direct correlation with the 89th mizmor, which is something I'll begin exploring later today. I have, so that you know where I stand in all of this, after we finish this review of Isaiah 54 that speaks of this remarkable woman and her role in building the covenant family. Because of Israel's bad behavior and their recalcitrance against Yahowah, erasing his name, rejecting his covenant, and failing to return to him, Israel has gone, better part, of 3,000 years without adding anyone to the covenant family, and therefore anyone into heaven. And so it is only during this time that there is an awakening, a recognition of Yahweh's name, a realization that Dowd is the chosen one, the Messiah, the Son of God, and the one who fulfilled Pesach by being crucified in 33 CE, and who took our guilt into Sheol on Matzah, also in 33 CE, to enable Bokurim, which is firstborn children. So as we came to that recognition, and we are pursuing that in here in Yeshaya 54, which is a whole discussion about how she's going to become productive again, personalizing this through a single woman who plays the lead role in accomplishing this on behalf of Israel. From there, we are actually going to jump into what is the darkest episode anywhere in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. It is 2nd Shamuw'el 11 and 12. And I'm going to share with you what Dowd did. It was one of the hardest things I've ever written. I had thought at the time it would be the hardest thing I would ever have to do. But it's something that we knew we had to cover, because in rabbinical lore, Dowd is disqualified as being the returning Messiah. Disqualified as being a son of God, he is disqualified as being the returning king because of the malfeasance of this moment. And so we have to deal with it. And in Christianity, those who are somewhat thoughtful in trying to defend the lie and the mythology of their man God, Jesus, say that there had to be some miracle birth and perfect person to fulfill this promise. They don't even know what the promise was. They have no concept that he fulfilled Passover and matzah. But nonetheless, they want perfection. And because Dowd was so imperfect at this moment, he is automatically disqualified in their minds. And so it's something, again, that we need to deal with for exactly this same reason. Now, that brings us to the overall problem, and I'm looking over my shoulder. My wife likes to come and go, which she's welcome to do, but we have a second camera that actually catches that door, and we just as soon not have it left open. The fact is that there is a grotesque misperception of what is presented in English translations as perfect. It doesn't mean perfect at all. The word is tamim, and it actually is from the root tamam, and it means to finish the job. If you finish the job, then you are living up to the expectations that God has, and you're totally qualified to do really any mission that God wants done. He just wants people that will have some resolve and fortitude and are willing to see it through. And Dowd became that man. So Dowd earned our respect by actually coming to grips with who he was and what he represents and what he needed to accomplish in his second of 3 lives to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bokurim. And he did. And there is an enormous amount of proof in this regard. But we're going to go through his meltdown. And then following that, I'm going to share with you the most horrible thing that I thought I'd ever see, far worse than Dowd's malfeasance in that whole affair, which is quite graphic. Dowd is angry at God for leaving him, for blaming him, for pretending, from Dowd's point of view, that he was somehow worse than everybody else. From his point of view, everybody was terrible. So what he did, he didn't think deserved the kind of rebuke that he received from God. And he wrote the 51st Mishal, not Mishal, but Mizmor or Psalm, in a really bad mood. But I think it's important for you to know how far he fell. Following that, there was an amazing intervention, and I'm going to ultimately share the second part of the intervention, because the meeting between Dowd and his surrogate mother, Leah, the Ashar, got his attention and earned his respect, sobered him up, but it was the subsequent meeting that made the biggest difference, and it was delivered by another individual. And then I'm going to share the text with that, which is a very familiar text. It's just that we didn't know who the delivery person was at the last time we reviewed it. So we'll go through that, and I want to leave on a really upbeat note in this whole process. So we're going to cover the 116th Mizmor, which is a celebration of Dowd getting it right again, of him not only recognizing who he is and what he needs to do, but laying it all out and saying, I'm happy to do it. This is what I'm going to accomplish. I am going to see it through, and it's going to be glorious. So we have quite the process here to go through. When we encounter something that is profound in terms of what it adds to our understanding of God's story, I don't like to tease. My view is, if God's going to take the time to tell us something that's this insightful, this compelling, the least we can do is see it all the way through and understand all of the implications. And that's precisely what we're going to do. So I want to pick up the story where we were in our last program. This would have been on Friday evening. And it reads, during a brief moment of time. It's kind of funny. From God's point of view, I'm sure it was. It could have been the blink of an eye. And in reality, it was a very, very long time, thousands of years. But, time doesn't move the same for all of us. And the seventh dimension, time is whatever you'd like it to be. So during a brief moment in time, it's Ba-Rega, in a disturbing instant and for a little while, as trifling and unworthy, and Israel certainly had become that. God says, I left you, Azab. I rejected and I released you. It's important for us to understand, because Jews have a tendency to think that God is still protecting them, that God is right there with them, that they can go to their western wall and bob their heads up and down and put a piece of paper between the cracks, and God's listening to their prayers, and that he is involved in their day-to-day lives. And nothing can be further from the truth. God's very clear. I left you. I mean, Azab is not a word that anybody has any trouble trying to translate. It means to reject, to release, to forsake, to abandon. It's pretty clear cut. I wrote a whole book on Azab because that's the nature of the prophet Hosea. The whole story from beginning to end in Hosea is about being divorced, God forsaking and rejecting Israel for cheating on him religiously. So here, during a brief moment in time, which turned out to be thousands of years, I left you, I Azab, but as a tremendous favor and sign of great compassion and mercy, I will gather you in a harvest. So this, oh boy, they talk about telescoping, the idea of you take this big, huge story in this big swath of time, and God says, there it is. You were really, really bad, and I divorced you. I left you because you were unworthy and just worthless, insufficient, and inadequate. And now, well, as a tremendous favor and sign of great compassion and mercy, I'm going to return and gather you in a harvest. That harvest will be next. The harvest will be Shamuw'el, followed by the gleaning of Towrah, followed by the purging of the religiosity of a remnant of Israel on the Shabbat of Towrah and year 6000, 2033, with the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, when then 10 days later, with the people purged and prepared, the witness Yahowah return with the Messiah, his beloved son, Dowd. So that is what is being described here. Isaiah 54:7. So there were a number of disturbing instances that served to sever the relationship between Yahowah and Yehudim. And these became particularly frequent, very antagonistic. and increasingly deplorable during the Exodus. Ultimately, the divorce proceedings were made manifest in Hosea when Yahowah rejected Israel for forsaking his Torah guidance and his Bereth relationship so that they could continue to be religious. And so it is only as a result of God's nature that this separation can be reconciled. But even then, this great favor to us as an unmistakable display of his compassion and mercy will only occur when Yisrael shub for shub, when they return to him. So God is on record saying that he is committed to gathering Yisrael in one last time, and he will collect a remnant of his people from around the world on Towrah. This will be following the Shamuw'el harvest, some 7 years after it. Some of these individuals will be harvested, others will be purged of their guilt when God brings them around the Temple Mount from around the world so that they might benefit from the sacrifice of the Adam Parah, all with the same objective. So numerous times Yahowah has or will release a torrent of waters, which is how he purges his people on this occasion. You can read the story in Numbers 5 about the sacrifice of the Adam Parah, and Numbers 19 as conducted as a dress rehearsal by Elijah so many years ago. In fact, 2,888 to be exact, from the moment that he will reenact that sacrifice. And it's all aimed at resolving the discordant notes men and women have been singing relative to God. This began with the flood when the religious were washed away. It occurred again during the Exodus to differentiate Yahowah's life-affirming nature from the diabolical disputes of the people. And it will reoccur one last time on Towrah when a torrent of water will be released from the Temple Mount to prepare this final remnant of Yisrael to receive their king. In between these episodes, Yahowah has remained hidden to most. Even today, fewer than 1 in a million people acknowledge him. Fortunately, with the advent of Yahowah and the 35 books that are free at yadayah.com, and this program that streams on some 15 different accounts and channels, the Yahowah blog, it's begun to change. There are many, particularly Israelites, who are coming home to Yahowah. So come Towrah, Kippurim, and Sukkah, in year 6,000, the relationship is indeed going to be restored. So the text reads, in a furious torrent of discordant outbursts, struggling with overwhelming dissension in the agreed relationship, I concealed my presence and appearance from you. However, with loyal love, unfailing kindness, enduring devotion, and unmitigated favoritism throughout time, I will compassionately reestablish a loving relationship with you. He, Yahowah, says, of your Ga'al Redeemer. Yeshaya, Isaiah 54:8. Now, you could read this as Yahowah is your Ga'al Redeemer, but it doesn't make sense to me, because that is a title that is perfectly fitting for Dowd, who is the most Yehud of all Yehud. And he is therefore kinsman, and he is the Redeemer by having fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim in year 4000 33 CE. So I think that God is acclaiming what his son will achieve. So it is through loyal love and unfailing kindness, just as God said a moment ago, favoritism throughout time, that he will reestablish this relationship. Out of the womb, if he will, I will express my affection and love towards you. Yahowah says, of your Ga'al Redeemer. So once again, it would be natural to conclude that Yahowah, as I've mentioned, is saying that he is our Ga'al, but I think it's more in keeping with God's nature to say that his unmitigated favoritism and enduring love for us are collectively expressed through his chosen implement his beloved Dowd, who, yes, is our kinsman redeemer. But either way, reconciliation is imminent and it's assured, although not for most. Rather than the waters of the flood ending life, next time there is a massive release of water, these waters are going to be restorative. And we have Yahweh's word on it. This is what he reported. This, for me, is in contrast to the waters of Noach, the trustworthy guide, which, for the benefit of the relationship, I made the promise that the waters associated with Noach would no longer pass over the earth. And it's actually a region of the earth where they were previously. In this way, therefore, I made a promise to restrain from being provoked to anger against you and from rebuking and reprimanding you. Isaiah 54:9. Well, God does a lot of actually of reprimanding, but he seems to be very incensed by Israel's horrid behavior. But he did not combine that with a release of floodwaters. So in this way, the statement is consistent with reality. So what we have learned is that the primary way that God has mitigated his frustration with humankind is to distance himself from his people and from the earth. Just as he revealed through Hosea, he returned to heaven, and he's going to remain there until such time as his people begin to return to him. God is now an absentee landlord, if you want to put it in those terms. I know there's a lot of people that think that God answers prayer and that God is listening to them and God is guiding and intervening with their lives. It's just not true. God says otherwise. God's very clear in saying that during the divorce proceedings that he was leaving. And he didn't say that he was going to come back when somebody created a false god, a man who was a god, a man god, so weak that men could kill this man god. He didn't say he was going to come back at that time. That'd be nonsense. He says, no, when you return to me, speaking to Yisrael, who he was divorcing, I'll return to you. It's the message that we read in Yirmiyah 31 with the reaffirmation of the covenant between Yisrael and Yehudim, that God's going to reaffirm it, but he is not going to do so until Yisrael returns to him. It is Shub, which is return for Shub, or no Shub for you. So that is how God has mitigated his expressions of frustration. And therefore, you could read all of the rebukes as having been conveyed by no later than Malachi, 447 BCE. And therefore, during all of this time, God has just held his tongue. There was no reason for him to say anything directly. He had already said it all. Now, moving on, the mountains of God from Choreb to Moriah have been corrupted, of course, by the religious. But no matter how far removed humanity has become from the intent of those mounts, Yahweh's agenda will not be thwarted. The covenant will be reaffirmed, and it will be reaffirmed as it was presented on Mount Choreb and then enabled on Mount Moriah, because these are what Yahweh desires. As a result, the mountains may yield to the touch, and the hills might be toppled and troubled. But my love, kindness, and enduring favoritism, it will not cease to be with you. Then my covenant reconciliation will not be shaken or slip away. He, Yahweh, says of Rakam, the one most loving and compassionate toward you. 54:10 of Yeshaya, Isaiah. And therefore, God's saying, bad things are going to happen, both to Choreb, which has a chain link fence all the way around it, and an Islamic enclave that doesn't want anybody to get anywhere near it, because, of course, it repudiates Islam. And you see two horrible scars on the Temple Mount. One, the Dome of the Hoofi print, which is the most absurd and ridiculous tale in the history of Islam. And then Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the inspiration for terrorist attacks. And so these terrible scars on the Temple Mount will be removed. They will be toppled. They will be no longer produce such a troubling effect, because Yahowah's enduring favoritism, it's going to return. And God may have distanced himself. Indeed, he has, but it doesn't mean that he has ceased to care. And ultimately, it's the covenant relationship that means the most to him. And there's going to be reconciliation. There will be Baruch Shalom. There will be blessings. There will be safety. There will be resolution and harmony in the family. It will not ultimately slip all away, be removed, because then the entire human experience would be for naught. And this is what Yah was saying as the most loving and compassionate towards his people. So when Yahowah said that the barren woman would conceive and that her children would become numerous, he was addressing her contribution to the covenant family that had been childless for all of those many centuries, 35 centuries, as a matter of fact. And so it is just now that the covenant is being filled again. The children are being conceived within God's bereth. And that is what the barren woman is all about, and why she is to be celebrated for her role in bringing so many wonderful people into the covenant. So while there were no entrants for, well, at least a score of centuries, and probably for 35, today, thanks that in large part to all that she has had to offer and contribute, well, it's a different story that is being written. All right, so at this point, I'd like to present two additional Mizmor. The first occurs prior to the Amah's visit and depicts Dowd's reaction to Yahowah's disapproval. The second was recorded after we were given the opportunity to meet with Dowd and share our concerns. But so what we're going to have here is that I'm going to share what actually happened 3,000 years ago. And then I want to share, as I have mentioned, the 51st Mashal. I will then go into the 116th. And then I'm going to reprise one that will be shared from a perspective that none of us have ever considered previously, that's pertinent regarding all of this. So it's time now that we consider what went wrong all those many years ago. Now, this is already unpleasant. So it's going to be a little quicker and easier to digest with the minimal amplification, which is what I'm going to do. I did that throughout this. This is not a teaching moment in the sense of we can glean something here and say, wow, let's celebrate what we're learning. God is teaching us how to emulate someone doing something marvelous for the covenant. That is not what this is. The narrative itself is harsh. And it begins by condemning political despots, all of them, and warmongers. Then it says that Dowd was shirking his responsibility as the protector of his people. He had dispatched every able man to besiege a civilian community and plunder it, except himself. He stayed behind. This battle was not heroic. The verbs that were chosen to depict the assault read as I'm going to present them, and that's not pleasant at all. This is really embarrassing for Dowd, for Israel. It was tragically embarrassing for God. And when I go through this, it's because I go where the words lead. God would not have told us this story in such detail if he did not want us to know it. We have to know that his beloved Son, our Messiah and King, who became our Savior, was terribly sullied, and that it would take a intervention like the world had never seen to resolve his deplorable mindset. So what we find is that Dowd was lounging around in bed during the day. He, in this case, got antsy, and he decided to get up and spy on his neighbor around sunset. And so a man derelict in his duty and lethargic literally became a voyeur, and then a provocateur. It's little wonder that Yahowah values work and defines tamim, perfection, as completing the job. God's not expecting us to be perfect, just to finish the mission that needs to be accomplished for there to be resolution of our separation, of our azab. All right, I'm going to share this with you. Again, it's not done in a typical amplified fashion. We'll get through it a little more unscathed, I hope, that way. But I will still take the time on key words to share them with you so that you know the terms that God chose, and in particular, the names of the people in this story. They're exceptional. So it came to be in the return of the year. That would be the start of the year, when the heads of governments go out. And Dowd dispatched Yoab, Father Yahowah, and his co-workers, servants, and slaves with him, even the whole of Israel. So you got the point. Dowd's now acting like any other king. He's gone from Yehudim to Goyim. And like all these other kings are around Israel, they were, come spring, they want to go off and play war. We're going to go dispatch the troops. And in a kingdom, one person has free will and everybody else is subservient. So everybody in a kingdom is essentially a slave. They're a servant of the king. And so that's what Israel had become. Now, I have said this before, and I appreciate Yahowah affirming this in the introduction to this story. Men and women are capable of being good or bad, and usually both individually. But collectively, humankind is always bad. Every story of every significant institution, nation, or empire is that they have done this very thing. They've dispatched armies to plunder their neighbors, to enslave people, to deprive most people of their rights. And so the larger the institution, the religion, the nation, the empire, the more power is concentrated with one person, as they are in all monarchies or any communist country, the worse they become. We're witnessing this in America now with the concentration of power by Donald Trump, who was demonically inspired. And with his every word and deed, America becomes more despicable. So it came to be in the return of the year when the heads of governments go out. Dowd dispatched Yoab, Father Yahowah, and his co-workers, servants, and slaves with him, even the whole of Israel. And they ravaged and they destroyed, corrupting and ruining, even spoiling and laying waste to the sons of Ammon, which means everything pertaining to people. So they laid siege to Rabbah, which which means greatest, while Dowd remained seated in Yaruwshalaim, the source of guidance on reconciliation. That was worth mentioning. This happens to be from Shamuw'el, Listen to God, 2 Samuel 11:1. That was worth mentioning because of two things. Previously, when there had been a battle to fight, Dowd led the fight. God protected him with Malak, and he led by example when it came to defending Israel. I'm not sure this was a defensive battle. Sure, the Ammon were harsh on Israel, but they were going off trying to plunder them and ruin the city. And this time, Dowd didn't go. He stayed at home. And that's uncommon in this time where the heads of empires went out. They led their militaries. It's the thing that pharaohs, for example, have got depicted on every graphic wall as they're leading the charge. Now, certainly they weren't in the front, but they were still with the troops and leading the troops in battle. Dowd was not. That is not a way for a king, particularly at this time, to earn the respect of his people. Go ahead, make it current. It would be like President Bonespur having 6 exemptions from military service during the Vietnam period on a lie, and then sending the troops out to be pirates and thugs and murderers and all manner of bad behavior. So it happened during evening time, around sundown, when Dowd arose from his bed. You catch that? Dowd got up off of his bed as the sun was going down. This means he had been in his bed during the day. His troops, all of Israel, it says, were out fighting, and he was lounging around in bed during the day. Now, if you want to compare that to God's frustration with Adam, which had been 3,000 years prior to this, for being lethargic and not engaging, we have the same situation, do we not? This is hard on Dowd, and I'm going to be hard on him. We're going to tell it like it is. I'm not going to pull punches. So this is the man I've come to love and respect more than any other, but he was very, very bad at this time and for a while thereafter. And so we need to deal with it, and we need to acknowledge how bad it was. So he was walking on the roof of the king's house as he saw a woman bathing from the top of the roof. The woman's outward appearance was very good, especially pleasing and desirable. 2 Samuel 11:2. He made this decision based solely on the way she looked as he was spying on her after napping during the day, as his troops were fighting for their lives. Then Dowd, he set out and he inquired about approaching the woman. He asked, "Isn't this Bathsheba, promised daughter, the daughter of Eliam, we are God's people, and the wife of Uwryah?" Yah was light. The Chitty, which means fearsome. She wasn't even a Yehud. So, Dowd dispatched Malachim. Now we can read that as ordinary messengers, somebody that was part of his household staff. We can say that Dowd actually had influence over Malach, spiritual messengers. The text does not say, but I think it's likely that these were human messengers. Malach means messenger. The fact that the term is normally used in conjunction with the heavenly host does not mean it has to be all the time. But it's an interesting choice of words, is it not? He dispatched malachim, messengers. Now, keep in mind, he's already done the reconnaissance. He's gone out and he's verified that this woman that he saw naked was the wife of a man named Light of Yah. So he knows what he's doing. There is no mistake here. He did that himself. Then, rather than going and grabbing her himself, he's dispatched messengers. And he grasped hold of her and took her. So he's out now with at least two others. And the first thing he did is lakak. He grabbed her. He took her. And she was brought to him, and he lay with her, sleeping with her. No chit-chat. No getting to know her. No romancing. No candlelight dinner. He saw her. He inquired and learned that she was another man's wife. He went out with Malak and he took her. Then, well, euphemistically, he slept with her, but I don't think there was much sleeping. Do you?
Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, is what it looked like.
I'm not sure there was a thank you, ma'am, but the rest of it is true enough. Now, she had been set apart from having been unclean and defiled, even offensive and unacceptable. Therefore, she returned to her house. Shamuw'el listened to God. 2 Samuel 11:6. What do you think God's saying? She had been separate for having been unclean and defiled, even offensive and unacceptable. Therefore, she returned to her house. Then the woman and wife became aware that she was pregnant, and she set out so that she could inform Dowd. And she said, I'm pregnant. Listen to God, 2 Samuel 11:5. What happened with the great Gabor? The courageous defender of his people. Dowd went from lounging around to sleeping around while his people were plundering a neighbor on his orders. He came to Jerusalem with 10 concubines and 7 wives, and we're told that he had already added considerably to both, even before spying upon and lusting over the site of Bathsheba. He was fully aware that she was the daughter of a good man and the wife of an even better one, a soldier no less, who was out risking his life for king and kingdom. Getting past the realization that Dowd has sent everyone off to war while he spends the day in bed, we're told that he dispatched malachim. I don't know if these are spiritual messengers, as the title would normally imply, or just human messengers, but to retrieve the wife of another man for a sexual liaison. Now, I'm pretty sure no matter what's your definition, that's not part of their job description. He compromised them too. There was no small talk, no going out for lamb and matzah. Just slam, bam, no thank you, ma'am. Now you can make of the resulting nomenclature what you will. But it's important that you know, because we were told that the normal word for menstruation, nida, was not used. She wasn't having her menses. Nope. What was used instead was tuma. And it says that Bathsheba was ethically, religiously, or sexually defiled and impure. It wasn't the time of month. It was her prior activity. So also telling in this regard, it is very rare for a woman to conceive immediately after her menstruation, because ovulation typically occurs 12 to 14 days before the next period, and sperm seldom survive more than 5 days in the reproductive tract. So had she been on her period, if that's how you want to read Tuma, which is really inappropriate because it speaks of ethical and religious sexual defilement, not nida, menstruation, she couldn't have gotten pregnant under those circumstances. And that, of course, leaves the door open for other possibilities, none of which are particularly kind to Bathsheba's reputation. Therefore, while Bathsheba was pretty, she was far from good. We do not know the nature of her indiscretion, but it was sufficiently concerning that she was trying to wash away the incriminating evidence, physically or emotionally. And what happened next is tantamount to abduction and potentially worse. Dowd ordered envoys to Lachish grab hold of her, at which point the king, Lachish, took her, with the subject going from plural to singular, so he individually grabbed her. Now, there was no opportunity for or request for consent. The facts and evidence are that he spied out on her. He established her identity. He sent staff to abduct her. He then personally grabbed hold of her. He had sex with her, which is to suggest that he might as well have raped her. Well, the selected terminology strongly and immediately suggests and infer that this wasn't Bathsheba's first affair. There is another concerning factor, as we will learn. When her husband returned from battle, he avoids her completely. He has a reason for doing so, but it's not even a hello, sweetheart. Check in to see how you're doing. Is everything okay? Do you need anything while I'm back in town? None of that occurred. Making matters worse, she goes back home and determines that she's pregnant. The result, for reasons previously mentioned, further undercuts Bathsheba's character. The child could well have been that of another man, explaining why she was trying to wash away her tuma, transgression. Not saying that is certain, but it's certainly a possibility. But now, after what Dowd has done, she schemes to turn her shame into an opportunity. She is an opportunist here. She tells the king that she's pregnant, perhaps inferring that it was his child without actually saying so. She didn't say, I'm pregnant with your child. She just says, I'm pregnant. She went from certain scorned and outcast, queen of the castle. And while that's bad, it's Dowd's response that was particularly nefarious. His retort to his indiscretion was to scheme his way out of responsibility. There was no, oh, sweetheart, you're the love of my life. If you're pregnant, isn't that wonderful? We're going to have a royal child and you'll be my queen and I'll care for you and protect you. No, that wasn't his response at all. So Dowd sent a dispatch to Yoab, Father Yahowah. Send to me Uwryah, Yah's light, the chitty, fearsome. And Yoab sent Uwryah to Dowd. Pretty straightforward. I want him. Send him to me. You know, kings don't have to explain themselves. This one didn't. When Uwryah, and means light in Hebrew, Yah, of course, is short for Yahowah, so it's Yah's light, came to him, Dowd asked, inquiring if Yoab was satisfied and content. And were the people at peace? Also, was the war prosperous and satisfactory? In a moment, we're going to see that every one of the verbs is simply a shalom. Very, very odd choice, but it's telling. Then Dowd said to Uwryah, go down to your house, wash your feet. So Uwryah withdrew from the king's house, and coming out, following him, a portion of something of the king. That's 11:8. But Uwryah lay down at the door of the king's house with all of the servants, workers, and slaves of his lord. He did not go down to his house. So they informed Dowd, saying, Uwryah did not go down to his house. Dowd said to Uwryah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? Of course, what is Dowd trying to do? He's scheming. If he can get Uwryah and Bathsheba to, then the child can be credited to Uwryah, and he's out of the hot seat. He, had a little hotty-taw with a married woman, and she got pregnant, and he's covering up the evidence. He's saying, oh, you see, congratulations on the delightful birth of your son, to another man who had nothing to do with it, who wasn't even in town at the time. Anyway, it's odd, as I have mentioned, that Dowd would use shalom in his query regarding the attitude of his late general. Why would you say is the king shalom? He's out fighting a war. The Israelites conducting the siege were also, are they shalom? Excuse me, they're at war. Shalom means peace, reconciled. Or he said, how's the status of the conflict? Well, I sent you out to plunder a town. Is it going peacefully? I mean, how could you be that out of touch with reality? That you would use shalom in all three of those circumstances. Now, since shalom, as we know, is typically rendered peace, it shows that the king was disconnected from reality, certainly of the war that they were fighting for him. By using shalom in the midst of conflict, we not only find the king corrupting one of God's most revered terms, shalom, but we also see his vulnerability and his insecurity. You see, by using it as my general shalom, he's worried, and for good reasons, that Yoab and his subjects had come to disrespect him for hanging around in his castle while they are out, in the vulnerable, fighting for him. So, is everybody okay? Everybody content? Everybody satisfied? It's going okay out there? So while disappointing, that's the only rational explanation for the improper use of the reconciling verb. Also curious, we do not know the nature of the maseth, that is the portion that Dowd has sent to follow Uwryah. It is translated burden, mess, collection, flame, gift, oblation, reward, and sign. And it's also said to mean portion, present, offering, or tribute. Now, if the latter, it was meant either as a bribe or as a way for Dowd to publicly feign respect for the man he was about to kill. Either way, it's inappropriate. Unable to manage his affairs, Dowd's scheme flopped. He wanted this honorable soldier to have sex with his wife so that he could be lured into believing that the child was his. But as it would transpire, Uwryah showed no interest in his home or his wife. And considering the evidence at our disposal, I think that he knew what we have surmised. She wasn't a prize, and he hadn't been the last man in his home or his bed. Had he gone home, I think that sparks would have flown, but not of the loving kind. Nevertheless, Uwryah was an exceptional man. He was likely covenant. He exhibited exemplary character throughout. The lone stalwart in this whole story. There was only one. And after hearing his response, had Dowd been of sound mind, he would have broken down. He would have wept. This is what comes next. Uwryah, the light of Yah, said to Dowd the beloved, "The ark, Yisrael, and Yehudah dwell in Sukkoth shelters, along with my lord Yoab. In addition to the servants of my lord, bivouacked under siege in the presence of open terrain." So, am I myself supposed to go to my home to eat, to drink, and to lay with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, I will not act this way or do this thing. 2 Samuel 11:11. Then Dowd said to Uwryah, "Stay here this day also, and tomorrow I'll send you back." So Uwryah remained in Jerusalem that day and through the following day. Can you imagine what he's thinking? Oh, wait a minute. He wants me to go home and sleep with my wife. I told him I wouldn't do it. And he says, "Well, then I'm going to send you back. But stay another day with me, then I'll send you back." Now, you think just maybe he's saying, I suspect something really odd is going on here, since I'm not your top general, since I'm not a messenger reporting on the war, since you called me out of nowhere for this meeting, and you haven't bothered to explain why you called it, why you wanted me to go to my wife, and why you're now want me to come over, well, as we see, for dinner and drinks, even after I told you that I wouldn't do such a thing. I mean, this is really weird in a very bad sort of way. Dowd summoned him again. And Dowd ate in his presence, and he drank excessively, so that he caused even the man himself to be drunk. And he went out in the early evening to lay down on his bed with the servants of his Lord, but to his house he did not descend. Wow. This was a contrast between good and bad, for sure, right and wrong. And our king was on the wrong side of this. After a man named Light of Yah stood up for the covenant, for Yisrael, for the king, foregoing the comforts of home by respecting that his comrades were out in the elements away from home and exposed to the enemy, Dowd flaunted his situation by eating and drinking to excess. Can you imagine? I mean, Dowd's response was both callous and hedonistic. He was the furthest thing from an exemplar at this moment. And in fact, he was validating all of my prior conclusions that he had been drinking to excess. And he did so to deaden his conscience to what he had become. But of course, that wasn't the worst of it, not by a long shot. It transpired in the morning. God, I hate to read this letter to you. Dowd wrote a letter. It was written to Yoab. It was sent by the hand of Uwryah. In the letter, he wrote so as to say, "It is imperative that you, Yoab, ascribe to and permit this. Placing Uwryah, mul, cut off as if a removed foreskin, in direct proximity to the fiercest and most severe, the most obstinate combatants in the battle. Then retreat from him, turning on him from behind his back, so that he will be struck down and wounded, then die." Samuel listened to God. 2 Samuel 11:15. You probably noted that I shared the Hebrew origin of the text that was underlying this written letter, including both Yoab and Mul. And I did so because I wanted you to know that I'm accurately reporting the bad news. Dowd wanted Uwryah, the light of Yah, snuffed out and tossed away, like one of the 200 Philistine foreskins he used to acquire Michal from Shaul. And he was insistent that Yoab, father of Yahowah, bend his will to his own, and not only permit this atrocity, but participate in it, making Yoab an accessory to murder. Makes my stomach churn, my head throb. It's heartbreaking. So it came to be, as Yoab was observing, closely examining, and carefully considering the approach to the city, he assigned Uwryah, the light of Yah, to the place where he knew that the most physically strong and vigorous men would be there. When the men came out of the city and fought against Yoab, and some of the people among the servants of Dowd fell, then Uwryah the Hittite, he also died. 2 Samuel 11:17. Many men were deliberately sacrificed and died. including one who was essentially assassinated, so that a cowardly, self-indulgent, debauched drunkard could add another man's wife to his harem. The crown of Israel had clearly lost its luster. A once good man had fallen and no longer had the capacity, moral fortitude, or resolve to get back up. Now, in his defense, he had been exemplary, even brilliant. From 8 years old to 56 years of age. He was one of the most heroic characters for 48 years before squandering the most burnished of all human resumes. Let's put this in perspective. Abraham, by contrast, was really never brilliant and all too often ignoble. The same can be said of Yishak, Jacob, and Esau, even of the 12 sons of Israel. Moshe didn't last a year before he begged God to kill him. So Dowd had set an endurance record of 48 years in the spotlight before jumping out of it. At 24 years under that same scrutiny, which is all that I have invested, I have empathy for the difficulty of the situation he was in. I'm only halfway to what Dowd managed to achieve in terms of longevity. And perhaps it is this unique perspective that gives me the ability to push through this darkness and to reestablish the light which had once shone so brightly, especially knowing that the fate of the world rests on rekindling it and then reestablishing it. Yahowah was, as we shall soon see, badly hurt. He's extremely disappointed. But deep down, God also knew that he had tried and failed when representing himself. He had grown resentful, then vengeful, and would even withdraw. He would allow his people to suffer unimaginable heartache and abuse, and he would cause even many to die. And so while Yahweh's indignation was righteous, and while he never compromised on his moral integrity, in some ways, like son, like father, both tried hard, were virtuous, and then, gave up after a long while. God remained virtuous, but he certainly gave up. So this is what makes the job that Leigh and I are trying to accomplish and will fulfill all the more remarkable and compelling. It is why there are upwards of, well over 1,000 prophetic references now that we're examining them regarding this specific mission, and likely so many more. It's the essence of the last mashal. It will be the subject of the greatest of all songs. So moving on with the story of Dowd's midlife crisis, we read, Then Yahowah sent a dispatch to tell Dowd all of the matters related to the war. So Yoab is telling Dowd what happened. And he instructed the Malak, this messenger, saying that when you have finished the entire report pertaining to this battle and this war, while you're speaking to the king, if it comes to be that the king's chima, venomous fury and toxic rage rises, escalating before you, And he says to you, on whose account did you approach the city to fight? Why were you unaware that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who struck Amalek? My father is king, the son of Yaruwshalaim. I strive to confuse. Was there not a woman to cast upon him a chariot mount and millstone from the wall so that he was killed in or with Tebets conspicuous? So why did you approach the wall? Then Yoab told the messenger, you should say, your servant, Uwryah, the light of Yah, the chitty fearsome, is dead. So the Malach messenger walked and came to Dowd and reported everything that Yoab had dispatched him to tell. 2 Samuel 11:22. Now we can only assume that this Malach messenger concocted the following pretext to the ensuing battle to avoid the king's wrath, because it is clearly inconsistent with Dowd's prior instructions as well as Yoab's preceding observations. So the Malach messenger said to Dowd, surely the Gabar, the strongest and most overbearing men, triumphed over us as individual men. They came out against us upon the open field, but it came to be that we came upon them up to the opening of the gate. Then those casting arrows at your servants from upon the wall, and some of the king's servants were slain. In addition, your servant, Uwryah, the light of Yah, the chitty, is dead. No grief, no remorse. The tirade of toxic vitriol was avoided by changing the story to absolve Yoab of complicity and Dowd of guilt in the successful assassination of a good man, thereby engulfing the light of Yah. Dowd, realizing that he had now committed murder and that Yoab could implicate him in treason, tried to assuage his general's conscience. Dowd said to the messenger, this is what you should say to Yoab. There is al-ra'ah, nothing evil or harmful, wrong or bad, in your eyes or perceptions with regard to this matter and these communications. Remember the choice of verb, ra'ah. Yahowah will use it. For indeed, as it is for one, so it is now likewise for the other. The sword of desolation consumes and devours. Oh, Dowd is saying, because you were complicit in my scheme, even though I ordered you to do so, now you were complicit in it and also guilty of murder. You keep that in mind. Be particularly harsh, Dowd said, and severe. Be relentless and resolved in your attack in this war against the city, and tear it down, demolishing it, leaving it in ruins. Cities are filled with civilians, women and children. Thereby you must reinforce his intensity and resolve, toughening him up, Dowd said. Well, I can tell you that was 2 Samuel 11:25, and as I read through this, I am grateful that Yahowah waited to this time, 24 years into our mission together, and that he waited to lead me to this result after having analyzed that final word picture, knowing that it was resolved. Or else, had I known how this travesty was ultimately resolved, I don't think I could have recovered sufficiently from this to devote all of my energies to reestablishing the king's reputation to his former glory. But I know now how it was restored. I know the role that we played in that regard. And I know that it was completely restored. And now I, for the first time, having returned to the story in the garden, I realize that God has no concern over us making a mistake, even horrific, if we can prove ourselves trustworthy and finish the job. But ultimately, Dowd, he was just a man, just like the rest of us. One put in a very difficult situation. He succeeded from 8 to 56. That's 48 years. Before spending the last 14 or some portion of them embarrassed and isolated, slicing himself down from exceptional to ordinary with the sword of his own tongue. Ultimately, he would be inspired to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, more than making up for lost time and lives. But someone else would have to be brought into him for him to finish the job. He, like Moshe before him, couldn't complete it without intervention. It's hard to imagine, indeed, stomach, that the man I've come to know and admire through his Mizmor and Mashal, as well as through the eyes of his father who loved him, fell this precipitously. Dowd was telling the man who obviously knew better that there was nothing wrong with setting men up to die for his indulgence. The most heinous and appalling episode in his life wasn't to be perceived as evil, as raw, much less even wrong. Or else, of course, the people would turn on the king and do to him what he has done to the light of Yah. And in those words, at least for a time, the greater luminary ceased to shine. Flame had grown dark. Dowd was, of course, blackmailing his general. He said that the sword of conscience and confession would cut both ways, devouring the king and his executioner. They were in this together, both compromised. Then, for bad measure, the man who was lounging around, drinking to excess, sleeping around, said to the man wielding his sword that he should man up, intensify his resolve, be fierce in his demeanor. He was to rule through terror, tearing down and demolishing a city, leaving it in ruins. The most Yehud of men had become a run-of-the-mill goy. He was what Yahowah had told his people to avoid. And so it would take a goy, acting like a Yehud, to save the savior of Israel and the planet, along with a very able assist from a woman, his wife. There's more to the story, and we will share it in the next episode of the Yahowah blog. I thank you for listening to the most painful presentation we have made thus far, although it will not be the most painful of all, because that is next. Good day.